Hello there. It's time to begin the awkward dance where I add people to the stream. Hi, I'm Scott. I'm going to add David and wait, wrong order. Tamyan and Nandini. Hello and welcome. So just to quickly go around and then maybe we'll do more lengthy introductions. I'm Scott Garner and I'm here helping out with this stream for CETI XRchive. It's our first kind of official XRchive stream after our introductory stream. We have here Nandini, the founder and executive director and president of CETI. We have David Lobser of Light Clinic and Object Normal and various other creative endeavors. And we have Damian. How do I even refer to you? Damyansky? What's the right?
That's the online username, yes.
Okay, we'll go with that because I'm going to just introduce you as artist and in particular internet artist just because your bio says you're an artist that lives in a browser. So you've done this to yourself. So I will pass it to Nandini now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nandini and welcome to our first stream for XRchive. For those of you who haven't sort of followed so far, and you should join the project. The goal for XRchive was to sort of look at XR tools and emerging technology tools as a way to tell stories and create experiences. But the ultimate goal is sort of the notion that technology, sort of more creative technology used in interesting ways by people who aren't usually developers, to tell stories, to create experiences, to provoke. And the focus for this sort of iteration of it is sort of themes of migrations and displacements, especially of Portland's BIPOC communities of color, and the stories of Portland that are erased, to make some stories more visible, to cover up some things, and to provoke action around sort of systemic injustice. And in the process, the whole project is participatory, and in the process, to build a whole community of people creating, using these emerging technology tools, researching, and perhaps producing new and unexpected, both applications, but also new tools new directions for these tools. We're really thrilled to have these amazing speakers and projects that you'll see sort of exploring XR in completely unexpected ways, and hopefully that maybe one of these will inspire you. So I'll turn it over, but I'm really excited about this project and about meeting both of you and hearing more about your work and your process, and perhaps you have advice for us at the end. So. Oh, I want to add one more thing, which is I probably should say something about CETI, which is that given that, so CETI is a creative emergent technology institute, collective vision for how we learn and research and make things in a collaborative way around challenges that impact the world, sort of social and environmental focused, and also how to do something, how to learn in ways that are really community focused and critical, but also exciting.
Okay, with that, now we will go into MoMAR land. So I will hand it to the two of you to introduce yourselves or each other, and we can show your slides whenever you're ready. Just let me know.
Ready.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first because Damian is going to be the main presenter. I am a co-founder of a production studio called Object Normal with Scott Garner. So we talk pretty much every day about a variety of different production projects. We've been mostly doing virtual reality projects for commercial clients for the last, how many years? Already 5, 6, 7, 8. It feels like a million years.
A while.
So yeah, we are actually working together on a project for one of the major headset manufacturers, and we've done a little bit of AR, not quite as much AR, mostly VR. But we actually collaborated on the very first MoMAR, which was also several years ago. I think it was 2017. Correct me if I'm wrong, Damian. So I was the kind of primary developer for the first MoMAR, but everybody who was involved in that first one was also a developer, so it was kind of easy to collect everybody's projects into a single place. Damian was the originator of the idea. We met at a conference called Versions, where I was talking a little bit about social VR work that I was doing at NYU with Ken Perlin. And Damian is an artist with a million ideas all the time. It's like he's more prolific than most people I know. And it's like I'm just always inspired by the work that he's doing. And this is kind of the our main project that we've been poking at for several years. So he had this idea. I was like immediately extremely interested in helping out with the project, and have been developing 4 versions of it now. We just released our most recent one, and I think I'll pass it off to Damiansky.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here and for the invitation. My name is Damiansky, or my online username is Damiansky, and I call myself an artist living in a browser because A, I spend way too much time online probably, and then B, most of my work that I'm doing lives on websites or apps. So that kind of like coined the term. That's basically all about me, to be honest, at this point.
I think I think people would be really interested in some of the other projects you're working on, maybe before you even get into MoMAR. Like you have an app that removes people from pictures.
But I think when we go into the slides, there will also some images where we can talk about those things.
Cool. Are you ready to jump into the slides now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. Everyone looks like they're in the right order. Okay. I'm going to mute myself and I will hand it over to you. And
all right.
Away we go.
We're going to talk about MoMAR today. This is basically like an artist living in a browser. And these are a couple of projects that I did so far. The one that David just talked about, the Bye camera, is a camera application that detects humans and then tries to take out the humans out of the picture, and has like an in-painting algorithm that tries to repaint the background, and it creates those like very surreal artifacts or like images where like people are kind of out but still in there, like you see the shadows, for example. Or like in the top left, there's another app which is called Long AR Cat. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Long Cat meme. So David and we created an app where you can draw the cat in AR through the city or whatever you like to. Here's a slide about David. I think he said already a lot. Oh, David, do you want to like add something here?
I think your slides sort of mostly point at the fact that I've primarily worked with VR. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep. And here like a bunch of projects.
So Cosmic Sugar is an app I've also been working on for years. Just released a new version for the Oculus Quest, and it's kind of a you can kind of make light shows for yourself in virtual reality. So you can control particles with your controllers. It's kind of a sound healing journey with lights. Luxury Escapism was a spa I worked on with Tyler Pridgeon in Dumbo. And that was ASMR and oddly satisfying inspired spa. So you go in and hear ASMR content. You'd sort of like play with goo with your hands, and there's like a sandbox you could get in, and it was just like a place for grown-ups to act like kids and kind of connect with each other in a way that you normally can't do. In cities. Long AR Cat, something I've worked on with Damian. Our next version of that is going to involve a long AR cat actually circling the Earth as everybody creates their own long AR cats. We're going to have a persistent cat that wraps around the Earth, and it'll be like realistic in terms of the number of meters that get added to the cat with every person. Flock is a project that was started at NYU, and it was made to be a I would say massively multiplayer. Can you say massively if it's 40 people? Is 40 people massive? So massively multi-user, location-based VR experience. So a lot of people would be together in the same place, and they could see each other as birds in a virtual reality experience and kind of have a gamified narrative experience together. And that's another project that's ongoing, and a new version of that is actually getting released for the HTC Flow's new headset.
I love that GIF of them with like the with the feathers. So good. Okay, so how did MoMA start? It basically started with like a bunch of artists, like pieces that we saw online that we really love. Like here you see on the left side, David crafts of YouTube Artifact Bot, which is like a program that selects random videos on YouTube, breaks the codec, so it creates those glitches and records them and puts them on Twitter. Or on the top right, you see Constantin's webcam video performance where he just recreates the DVD screensaver. Or like in the bottom, there's Leah Berdugo's military PowerPoint character, which is very fun to check out if you don't know about it. But there's like all this work out there that we really love. And it kind of like triggered the thought, like, okay, why is that work that we love not in the museums that we also really like? And from there, David and I, we had a conversation and we talked about it. And it kind of like reminded us on the Salon de Refuse. I think that was like 1863, where like basically all the artists who didn't get into the Grand Salon of the Louvre, they created their own show, and that show became way more popular than the show that was curated by, let's call them the elites at that time. So that kind of triggered the thought, okay, maybe we can do something similar, and sparked this idea of MoMAR, which is like an augmented reality gallery that is housed, or that is like in the MoMA but not authorized by the MoMA. Our first show that we put together was called Hello, We're from the Internet, because it's all like online artists or net artists or people who do stuff online. And from there, we like started to reach out to people, and David had this huge group of people that was, what's the right words, that like joined this endeavor. Right? And yeah, from there we had to like figure out where and how we do it, and we decided to do it in the former Jackson Pollock room. And the Jackson Pollock room, it had like two reasons why we picked it. Reason number one was because the paintings work very well as markers, as AR markers, and the second reason was because it had a bench. It was like one of the only places that had a bench in the MoMA. We thought like, okay, if we have our own gallery within the MoMA, let's also have a bench. Yeah, from there, David, you want to talk about this, like about the hackathon?
Yeah, so I mean, for our first round of artists, we were mostly working with people we knew from ITP and people who were developers and were able to, create things that we were able to drop into the app directly. So we were actually able to get our first, and what I still think is probably our most ambitious app together very quickly, because everybody knew what they were doing, which was awesome. So I think we're looking at Gabe BC in the middle, and that's Sarah Rothberg on the left. And then your friend, that is, I'm forgetting his name. Harold, yes. Yeah, and then let's see who else is in there. Yeah, I think that's all the people that were there in that picture, but I think almost all of us were there for that initial hackathon.
Yeah, it was also like very ambitious in the timeline, right? I think we kicked off on the 5th of February or something, and then the hackathon was on the 24th, so we launched on the 2nd of March.
Yeah, we were very efficient with our first one. So the one issue we ran into, like, we were being very ambitious. We had a date set, and we got everything up on Android, and we got everything sent to the Apple Store, but we didn't actually get approved until the day after our opening. So we actually had, our first one was also our most well-attended one, and I wound up having to manually install our app on about 50 people's phones at MoMA. Like, and we were like constantly aware that a guard was gonna like wonder what we were doing there, but they didn't mind. So as of like the day after the show, everybody could actually download the app, but it was very white knuckle going into that first one.
Yeah, technology-wise, we used Buphoria for Unity, which wasn't that hard to set up, right? It was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, Buphoria has been around for a long time. I think it was developed at Carnegie Mellon. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Scott. But their image tracking is far and away the most superior. There are other image tracking solutions, but Vuforia just makes it incredibly easy, and the performance is really good, and it's still unmatched to this day. It's also extremely expensive at this point. If you want to use it on a client project, they sort of charge a license fee based on how much money your client makes, meaning that it's a little inaccessible for certain kinds of projects. But for a certain scale of project, we kind of got grandfathered in terms of our license as well. So we didn't have to pay an exorbitant fee to be able to use their technology, but it definitely made it a lot easier. And at that point, I think ARKit and ARCore might have been just barely available, or maybe not available at all. So there wasn't really the option to do the kinds of tracking we can do now, which is, it's like register a floor or, register space in the same ways that you can do at this point.
Yeah, that here like some images from our opening. There were like 8 artists. There was Sarah Rothberg, Gabriel Braciel Colombo, Tara Sin, Louis Fu, Harold Howardson, Scott was there, David, and I. And the way how we did it, we try to keep it like very on the down low, and like didn't put our website up until the opening, and we just sent like friends invites, and then each artist brought like their friends, and it ended up that the whole room was full. And we did our opening on a Friday, because on Friday after 3 p.m. there's like free entrance, and at a certain point around 6, all the security people have been in our room because they're wondering while the whole museum is empty, while this room is like very crowded. There's also like Scott's piece in the top left, the one where like you scan the painting.
Yeah, so I don't know. Do you want to talk about your piece at all, Scott, since you're here?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So from my perspective, I can give you my very brief interaction with the project. So I was contacted. I think David just asked me if I wanted to participate. I think everybody else was in New York, but I was actually in Portland at the time. So I might have been the only remote contributor. But it was a pretty interesting process and pretty smooth for how quickly it came together and became an app. And I think, David alluded to the fact that everybody seemed to know what they were doing. So I think that was a kind of a refreshing thing to have things come together well. It was a pretty democratic process in terms of these are the paintings in the room, people choosing paintings, figuring that out. So if it isn't clear, each artist, I think it was 1-to-1. Is that correct? Every artist just corresponded to one painting. So every individual artist sort of chose a single work by Jackson Pollock that hangs in this gallery. As we've alluded to, but maybe not just explicitly said, for those of you that are maybe not familiar with this kind of AR technology, so you would call this a fiducial tracker, right? Is that the term? I always feel like I'm getting the name wrong with that. But it is the simple version of this that you see very frequently is a QR code. And so this is an image that is doing the same job. And so I chose a particular painting. I was very interested in kind of the story that Damian alluded to in terms of like who gets to be in a gallery, who doesn't, what's the process, why are these things important, who tells you they're important. And so mine was very, I don't know, maybe I've softened a little in the last 4 years. It's maybe a little more snarky than I would be at the moment, but the kind of the theme of mine was that you're using this software on your phone and it's looking in the world for things that are just gross or a mess and tries to make them better. And so my particular experience is you scan this painting, the painting pops up like a Windows 95 alert that says this is a mess. There's just there's garbage on the wall basically, and you can press a button to fix it. And so you would press the button to fix it, and then through your phone, you would see the image, the Pollock image sort of defragmented into a pleasing image. And the image body that I chose, which again, on the same wavelength with Damiano, I chose Windows 95 era wallpaper images. So he has that wallpaper behind him now. But that was the source. I actually went and dug up old Microsoft wallpaper archives looking for them and use those as the source, because they're in some ways it's the same thing, I don't want to go too deeply into it, but if you think about it, how many people have seen the image behind Damian just because somebody said, this is the image you will see when you use Windows? There's like a strange curatorial process there in the same way that there was in MoMA. So that was my aim for this.
Yeah, and the beauty was that everybody kind of like did something different. Like in the top right, you see like the GIF with like that says Painter's Block. I think Gabe created almost like a game that you can like interact with, and you had to like help this painting that it's not getting captured by those skeletons that are crawling up from the bottom. And then another one did like a sound installation that was triggered by a painting. So everybody had like a different approach. It was very beautiful. And like, I think also because we had such a time constraint, it captured an energy because you couldn't polish it too much. You had like 6 days to figure out what you're doing and what you want to show at the end. And I'm a very big fan of that energy.
Yeah, we didn't have time for revisions. We didn't have time for negotiations. It was pretty much like, like you get one shot. So what are we gonna do?
This would be very meta. I have a video here of the opening. Should I show a Vimeo video on a YouTube live stream? Should we try to do that? Because I think
absolutely. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Let's see how that goes.
So there's no sound, so you might have to make sound effects.
But like here you see like all the people who came for the first opening. Looking
I think
around.
It bears repeating. I would say it really bears repeating that this was completely unauthorized, right? Like MoMA had no idea this was happening. This was not approved or sanctioned in any way. This was a group of artists that went in and kind of took ownership of this space with basically virtual graffiti that in any other context, covering up the art in a gallery space at MoMA would have been a disaster. But you got away with it. And were you approached at all? Did the security guards say anything or just give you sideways looks?
They mostly gave us
at the first one. They didn't care. I think it was our third one where we had one security guard who was getting a little uptight, thinking that we were using video because apparently you're not allowed to record video at MoMA. So we just kind of sidestepped, and eventually they moved on to another room. So yeah, mostly we weren't bothered. I was going to mention something about the previous group that did a thing with AR at MoMA. Do you have a slide about that, or is that something that we should break in and talk about?
I don't have a slide here, but there was in 2013 a group that was called We Are MoMAR, AR MoMAR, and there was a Blipper app back in the days, and they created a takeover of the MoMA entrance also with AR, which is like very cool.
I think that was was it 2013? I think based on their website it says 2010. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, like even though it was Damian's original idea from scratch, nobody had ever thought about it before. Other people had thought about it and had done a similar project years before, and we actually wound up collaborating with one of those artists, Tamiko Thiel, on our most recent version of
version 4. Yeah.
So I think some of her work will be later on in the presentation.
That brings us to MoMAR version 2, which is called YouTube Artifacts, and it was a solo show of David Craftstar, one of the artists that you saw in the slide before, with like his YouTube artifact bot. And here a couple of visuals that represent what he did. So he basically created this program that goes off on YouTube, finds videos based on certain parameters, breaks the codec, and records it at the same time and posts these online. So we used those final artifacts to like show them in the MoMA. It was like the same technology, it's kind of like the same setup as we did it before. We were very happy to be working with him. And after that, we started doing MoMAR version 3. And for MoMAR version 3, the title was open to the public. And the idea behind it was that instead of overlaying the paintings, each artist gets one wall. So we have like 4 walls. And the idea was that you kind of like break the room open. In our process, the way how we work, we like find a couple of artists that we really like, or like friends of friends, and then say, hey, this is like the setup. Please let us know what you like to do. And then they come back with something. And sometimes you have a concept in mind and you see something else is coming back. And you're like, okay, that still works. So not everybody did this, what we had in mind in the beginning. And we kind of interpreted it differently. Like on the left side, you have Akihiko Taniguchi, who created like an augmented reality selfie where he put himself into the room and you have like this virtual hand looking at him. And when you take a picture of him, he also takes a picture of you while all those paintings are floating around. Aaron Koch, he overlaid the whole left side with like digital artifacts. And Manu Rosner, which is like the third one from the left, he created this like very like material amorph structure and opened up this room and kind of like extended it. And then on the right side, you have Exonomo, who kind of took the brush strokes of Jackson Pollock and let them generate like almost like a new wall in front of the wall. And that brings us to MoMAR version 4. It's called Augmented Species. It was created by Tina Sauerländer and Ursula Ströbele. And this time the thought was like less using like markers than using augmented reality sculptures, hence the title Augmented Species. And this kind of, because COVID happened, we thought, okay, where can we do this? And we thought about, what about if we do it in the sculpture garden at the MoMA? So you can basically like place different sculptures within that place. And we also thought, okay, maybe this is like a touring show because there are not so many tourists these days in New York, and traveling is still not what everybody feels comfortable with. So we thought, okay, let's start there and then do a touring show that goes around the world to like different sculpture parks or museums. And for that, we decided to go with ARKit and ARCore. Do you want to go a little bit more into detail on that, David?
Yeah, so this is our first departure from image tracking. And we wanted to make use of some new tech. This is something that, we've been talking about with MoMAR in general, is the idea that, it's like partially it's a exploration of art, but, partially it's also an exploration of technology. So ARKit and ARCore have been around for a while, and they're like a primary feature, amongst many other things, is the ability to do plane tracking. So just by moving the camera around, these devices kind of have like baked into them at a pretty low level the ability to figure out where objects are in space. And some of the early apps that came out with ARCore and ARKit involve tape measures, because based on a combination of not just the camera but also sensors inside the device that can tell how fast it's moving and how it's rotating, like you can actually get a sense of the scale of objects in the world. So with image markers, the idea is like you see an object in the space and it maps things like directly to where that image is. With MoMAR 4, you just detect that there's a ground plane and then place sculptures into it. So we took over the sculpture garden for a change instead of a gallery with images in it. And with the original MoMAR, it was really all about being in that one particular room. And yes, it's like the images were anywhere, but they were all together in that one particular room. And the art that we made was designed to correlate with the scale of those paintings. So with this, with MoMAR 4, you could really do it anywhere, because it's really just about tracking a plane and placing an object. So we implemented some location-based features, which meant that you actually, for the first time, actually had to be at MoMA to actually create these sculptures. But once you're at MoMA, you could put them anywhere.
Yeah, and like the participating artists were like Sophia Crespo, Philike McCormick, Carl Aganis, Joanna Hoffman, and Tamiko Theo. And Tamiko Theo was one of the originators of the We Are MoMAR. It was like 2010 that David was talking about. It was like very nice to work with her, because kind of like closing the loop and like collaborating together on something new. Here you see like a couple of visuals, how it looked like at the sculpture garden. And what we also did on top of it, we kind of geolocated it. So it started in New York at the MoMAR, but then it went to like different cities and to different countries. And each Friday was opening in a different place. And after 2 months touring around, we actually opened up the app that now everybody can do it anywhere. So you don't have to be in a museum anymore. You can do it from home or wherever you like to do it.
So, yeah, can I ask a question just a little bit about that? When you said it's moving around and you can do it from anywhere, does that mean the audience gets to sort of place these sculptures anywhere, or do they get some agency in creating some of the sculptures, or what is it doing? I'm curious about that.
They can place them anywhere. Before that, it was geolocated, so you can only use the app if you're in the location. And now you can use it anywhere and place the sculptures wherever you want to. And there's definitely, you have an agency how you would like to arrange them, how you like to look, how they look next to each other. And you can also scale them up a little bit if you like to.
Yeah, and it sort of, gets at a little bit of, I don't know if inherent tension is the right term, but there's the app is called MoMAR, and it was designed to work at MoMA, right? So with this new one, it's still called MoMAR, but it's designed to work at all of the other galleries. And as of now, you can just download the app and use it anywhere. So, there's an aspect of the app where it's really meant to be a guerrilla gallery at MoMA. And a lot of what's really interesting about the project is the fact that it sort of encourages this social engagement where you're using an app, but you're actually there in person with other people. So, it's sort of an ongoing discussion with us. It's where does it make sense to have the app be something that you can access from anywhere, which is great because we want people to be able to see the art and to have the experience. But, how much of that is in conflict with the sort of underlying original inspiration for the project, which involves it us taking over MoMA specifically. So that definitely came up as much more of an issue with our fourth MoMAR, and something that we're thinking about going forward.
I was going to ask a question about that, which is, so initially you have a date for the show. So does that mean after the show, the few months, the app stops working, or so that it does feel like an art show in some ways, or is it ongoing? Can one access all 4 of the MoMARs in the MoMA at the moment? And then I wanted to ask whether it is meant as the sort of critique on sort of the exclusivity and inaccessibility of these spaces sometimes, and who gets invited. Has MoMAR, the museum, thought about sort of embracing this and saying, hey, yeah, we want them there? Would that kind of make you want to move somewhere else? How would that influence what you wanted to do with it if it became another thing that MoMA sanctioned in some ways?
So far they didn't put a comment out. We had a lot of press talking about it, but they never said anything. So we're not in the situation, luckily, that we have to think about it. Idealistically, we would obviously say no. But at the same time, we also tried in the beginning to set this whole thing up kind of open source. We created a guide how people can create the app, and less open source in a GitHub way, the more we literally sat down and wrote a Word document step by step how my brother, who's a chef, could do this, so that more people can do it, and more people create their own versions of. They don't even have to call it MoMAR, just their own augmented reality takeovers. So more people can show different stuff in those museums, which is kind of the basic idea of this whole endeavor. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of, the idea of the time constraints, initially the app was, we didn't cancel the app after the opening. It was available for anybody to get it at any point, but kind of organically, MoMA, moved paintings around. So, 2 months after we released the app, you could only actually see half the show. Each additional app we've basically been overwriting. So the first show is no longer accessible, and the second and the third, it's those essentially don't exist anymore, and it's really just it's always the latest one.
I think like a big learning for us was that when you do like when you show art in augmented reality, and David pointed it out, that like your body's kind of in relation to the piece, which is very different than when you just look at when you just scroll through a website and have a look at a piece. That was like for me one of the biggest learnings out of this project.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I think that's kind of. I think somebody's cooking. I don't know which one of us that is, but okay.
I know which one it is.
sounds like Damian's about to have a very nice dinner. I'm jealous. So yeah, I mean, this is just sort of a general note about AR art in general, but something that I think came out of MoMAR that surprised me too is just like the difference of interacting with space via your phone. It's like it's still a screen-based thing and it's a display, but it's much less diminutive. Even though you're still looking at a small screen, you're interacting with the world, with your body and with space, where it just like you kind of get that effect of size mattering. With Jackson Pollock paintings are huge, and by looking at those Jackson Pollock paintings through our phones, it's like our art suddenly became huge as well. So it's like suddenly, you're not just scrolling through these tiny images that look as small as your phone does, even though literally it is that small, it feels much bigger. So that's part of it. And then, just the fact that you're in this space with other people looking at these things together, like brought the whole experience out of just being an app. It's like MoMAR is not just this thing that you download and I can't just send you MoMAR the app and let you have the full experience. You really have to show up on site and ideally be there with other people. I mean, it's kind of meant like most of the experience comes from going to the opening and being there with others and sort of interacting together. And that's really I mean, at least to me, like that's sort of the most interesting and important part of what we've been doing is this sort of social construct and this social event that happens around the creation of the app. And you're still muted, Daniel.
It's also kind of interesting to see how organically it spreads. Remember, like when we did the first opening and we like downloaded it from people had to download from your computer, and as soon as somebody held their phone up, another person was looking at the phone, was like, "Hey, what is this?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, you go over there, and then you can download." And at the end, there was like a line waiting to download the app, and it kind of like spreads through the space. Yeah.
So I have a couple questions, if I could. One, do you have any more slides? I want to be sure you cover everything you want to cover.
Yeah, there are 2-3 more. This is like
okay. Go right ahead.
The MoMAR core team by now was like Monique, David, Vicky, and I. It started with like 2. Monique came in like version 2, and then Vicky joined us for version 4, and we're like all 4 working on this together. It's like important to mention. Plus, obviously, like the artists always, and in this case, also the curators. And I think that was basically it. Yeah, open questions.
Okay, that's great. So thank you both for walking through that. I will start with a few questions that I have, and these again are things you alluded to, but I think it would be interesting to dive into these a little more. So one, there's these 4 MoMAR versions. Were these individual separate apps? Was it the same app that got updated with new art? How did you handle that?
The first 3 are the same app, and we basically like updated the app and took like the other exhibition out. MoMAR 4 became a separate app because we found out that if you update the tech stack, that it's like very hard to do it on an app, on a previous app, because it's like not every phone can use like ARKit. So there's kind of like this policy that you have to like create a version that works on every phone that you started with in the beginning.
And then,
yeah, we found that out at the very last minute too. So we had to, that was like a little bit of an emergency discovery.
And kind of on that, the authoring of this, as you had mentioned, David, the initial group of artists were mostly kind of creative technology people that could sort of do the work in the environment required. You've mentioned Euphoria. You haven't talked very much about Unity. are all four of them all experiences? Was everything created in Unity or built with Unity? How did that work as you got away from sort of that core group of technologists with the later artists? Working with them, what was the process to get their work into Unity? Were they directly working in Unity? Were you working with them directly to integrate it? What was the technical process like?
Yeah, with the second MoMAR, David Kraftsow basically provided movies and images. So we did all of the production in terms of incorporating that into the app. With MoMAR 3, that was also a group of people that understood how to, I forget exactly like who was more experienced with Unity or not. I think in one case we had to, kind of, take models from somebody else and incorporate it ourselves. But in that case, they understood the requirements well enough to, not get too ambitious, I guess, with their technology. And then with the last one, everybody was using Unity. And we actually did have one situation right at the end where at the last minute we did have to get somebody to convert an Unreal project to Unity because of a misunderstanding earlier on in the process. So yeah, somebody had mentioned like, UE is what we're going to use, and I think we were all like, oh, Unity engine, of course, but no, that's Unreal Engine. Yeah, for the most part, our artists, the artists that we work with are artists that use technology and are familiar with technology, and we're not having to do a lot of translating for them.
Okay. And on that front, I mean, maybe it bears saying for people watching this that are interested in XRchive and working on XRchive projects or learning how to do some of these things themselves. When we say Unity, we're specifically referring to the Unity game engine, which is wait, there's a future slide. That was going to be my next question. It was, so thinking about those tools and the tools that you use, you've mentioned using Unity, which is a game engine. You mentioned using Vuforia, which in this case was a AR kind of toolkit that you brought into Unity. So it was a Unity SDK built by Vuforia, which actually I looked just to, I can't remember the actual origins. I think it was a Qualcomm company, maybe based on CMU research. Anyway, just for clarity. And then now you've mentioned ARKit and ARCore, which are competing platforms really, one from Apple and one from Google. So in supporting both of those, especially with MoMAR 4, how did you do that? Did you use the Unity Foundations translation layer to handle both? Okay. Do you want to talk about that at all? It's kind of a big shift from Vuforia to these newer platforms. And so you mentioned it did kind of require having a new app. Did it change anything else about your approach to the project, kind of from a tech or production standpoint?
Like Damian said, we basically started from scratch in a lot of ways, and needed to build up some infrastructure from scratch. And we were fortunate in that we had another gallery that was a collaborator and kind of provided some resources for us to be able to develop a template. And it was kind of, based on, it's like referenced the kind of like UX and user flow of Acute Art, if you're familiar with that one. It's another AR app. So we kind of took a cue from the way that they did things. And it's like an app where you can like place sculptures of mice. And I forget the main artist's name who was involved in Acute Art. But yeah, the idea is, it's pretty simple. It's like you grab, you look at a gallery of images, you click on one, and then we needed to set up a way to place that in the world. And then we also have some infrastructure there to be able to tap on the object to move it, scale it, like that kind of thing. So the details of that were kind of surprisingly tricky to get set up. It's like sort of the tech, but also the UX. It's like, what part of the image do you tap on to move it versus what part do you tap to rotate it? That kind of thing. Required a bit of work to make functional, and also like getting all these objects in a space where you could select one or the other and like delete one, like that kind of stuff. So there was a fair amount of of work to get all of that stuff happening. And
because in the first 3 versions, it was for the viewer, it was a relatively passive experience, right? You essentially just looked through your phone, and your phone was kind of a magic lens. But with this version 4, you actually can interact with the app, and by extension, interact with the objects in the space. Interesting. And so that kind of the question I'm curious about from that is what you're thinking for the future, both in terms of themes and content. How do you feel about, it sounds like there's some tension in terms of the hyper-specific, site-specific versus something that's more open or traveling. And how do you feel about, now that you're multiple versions in, you're starting to maybe kind of have a curatorial voice. You're starting to kind of have a voice that says what goes into MoMAR and what doesn't go into MoMAR. And how are those things maybe influencing how you're thinking about this for the future?
So I think that actually, I just want to say one thing really quick, and that I think that, your point about curation is really interesting. And I am fairly convinced that going forward, we should continue to develop our curatorial voice and be the curators. But I think Damian also has a lot of opinions about that as well.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Like David and I, we started talking about it, and kind of like that becomes a theme. Like what is the next version? Like this version, we work with some curators, but like, what does that mean for MoMAR 5? Do we become like the same thing as we're going against, or like is maybe the thing that we will talk about in MoMAR 5, finding like another way how you can create stuff that doesn't involve us, could be one way. So that it's an open discussion. It's not, there's no end point to it so far, and let's see where it ends up.
Yeah,
do you have any? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, part of MoMAR 4 came out of a desire I had to explore, what we could do with ARKit and ARCore. And something I'm very interested in working with in the future is networking of some kind, and some kind of interactivity, and what that looks like exactly, I'm not sure. But
because some obvious questions, and I'm sure these are things you've considered, is like, well, how, you've, as far as what the viewer is capable of, you went from sort of totally passive to now they have some agency, and you can imagine a direction where you give them even more agency and they can create the art. We have a couple of questions from the chat, and I have some questions. I think it's in line with kind of trying to tie this back to XRchive a little bit, and some of the things we're thinking about, especially in terms of maybe a more, I hesitate to use the terms, but these are the terms I use, but more of like a social awareness or activism or that world removed from the art world. And I wonder if you've run up into any questions like that. So for example, just a conversation that came up in talking about XRchive and MoMAR, showing MoMAR, some people were immediately inspired, was like, oh, well, you could go to City Hall or some legislative building or something like that and look at all the portraits of old white people and replace them with something else or something along those lines. But another context where outside of the art world, where you could kind of intervene with content of your choosing. Is that something that has come up for you at all, either in your internal discussions or even just in the coverage of MoMAR? The idea of other totally different contexts outside of the art world for this kind of like intervention layer.
Yeah, especially after like the first exhibition that we all did together, we had like a lot of people reaching out, and we always pointed them to like the step-by-step guide that we created to like create their own exhibitions. And there were like 2 parties there who had like something more political in mind, like a little more like an activist approach, and they didn't even want to talk about it. Like, yeah, you do whatever you'd like to do. So I think the beauty about this is that you can use it for anything, right?
So I want to actually follow up on that, which is that sort of you're using XR as a tool as a tactical tool to make a statement, to sort of critically engage with maybe an art world or maybe something else. And I'm curious if you have a vision for other directions one could go with it, but also other tools you've found or other projects you worked on that have that sort of lens to it, of using creative technology as sort of a tactical tool in engaging in some ways with the world. So beyond sort of the aesthetics and the like possibility and power of the technology about what it can say in the world or about the world.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about technology, that you can always subvert it. Like I remember there was a group who created who created a deepfake video of Zuckerberg and uploaded it to Facebook because he made a point that like, oh, I can't control it if it's deepfake or not. And then basically he was like the victim in one of those videos, and it's kind of like caused like a debate in that moment. So I think there are a lot of examples where you can just like flip it and use it for like a different, for a different goal. In a good way, and unfortunately also sometimes in a bad way.
And I wanted to ask another question about your process, which is you talked about the first time you did it over like a really compressed time frame in a hackathon. And I'm curious if all of those had that intensity or were phased, and whether the process could still work if not everyone was an expert, whether like a group of people and artists who maybe wanted to make work or collaborate with technologists could sort of work on something like this, and whether you have ideas or advice for have you tried it, or do you have thoughts on it?
It could definitely work. I think like the one thing that's like important to point out was like MoMAR is like all pro bono. We all just like put our time in, and then just with that in mind, we also try to like, okay, who is also able to do certain things, because it's at the end it's very time intensive, and then trying to like not make it as hard, even harder. But like for MoMAR 2, 3, and especially 4, we like spend way more time on this than like for the first version.
I mean, I think it is important to have people who do have technical know-how be involved, obviously. And ideally, those people are fans of the people who have less technical know-how, so that they are, inspired to put in the extra work that it takes to help those people get their work out there. And I think even with less technical people, as long as they have some digital chops, it's like the more technical people can kind of help them do whatever it takes to kind of deliver things. I would say in terms of process, these have gone the best when it's like we kind of are very strict about like how things need to come in. And I think things have gone better when we've had very tight timelines where we just like decide like we're going to do this and it's compressed. Our last one, we had a lot of time, and you just kind of like however much time you have, you wind up filling. So, if you have a deadline that's like 3 months away, then it's going to take you 3 months to do that thing, and it's not, and you're just going to be less efficient about it. So I think there's definitely something to be said for time pressure with creative projects.
Well, I think we're coming towards the end, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We also do have a stream coming up after this, and so I think in closing, just for my part, and then I'll pass it to Nandini, I want to thank both of you for walking us through that. Participating in that project was amazing. It was a really really rewarding project, even though now I'm a little sad to hear that you can't use MoMAR 1 currently. Maybe I can have David build it to my phone from his laptop directly. And I do actually, I want to build slightly on something you just said, because I think it is something that actually, if you would be willing to, maybe in the future, we could have a little bit of a talk about, maybe a little more of a technical talk, just because I think for people watching that may not know how these things are made, I would imagine there was a huge variety of tools that were used for kind of the asset creation, and the individual models or individual images could have come from any number of places, and they were kind of funneled in through a specific kind of art pipeline into Unity to then be shown with these technologies in AR. And I think it may be interesting for people who don't know to learn a little more about that. And so maybe in the future we could trouble you to talk a little bit, maybe a little more behind the scenes on how some of these things work internally. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us, and I will pass it to Nandini.
Yeah, thank you. This has been really, really incredible. We showed, when we just did a brainstorming session for XRchive, we showed a little piece of this project, and people were really excited at the potential, so it's really great to sort of hear more about the process, and also that you have this sort of recipe or a little like toolkit for people who want to go off and play and interpret your sort of vision for this differently, possibly in creative ways. But I would love to sort of, thank you so much for joining us. And do you have any sort of last ideas or advice or or thoughts of anything. Yeah. This
I mean, this whole project came about because of just like a crazy and inspired idea, and I mean, it came together because you know, we got some energy behind a concept, and we pushed forward until we were done. And you know, not every idea kind of comes around in a way that's so fully formed as this one does. It's like, we're going to do AR at MoMA. Like, it's like you can kind of like do whatever you want in that case. But when they do come about, you know, it's like, I mean, it was great just sort of going through the whole process and working with people who came into it with different perspectives and different skills. And, you know, it's like, we didn't have egos about it, and we just like wanted to make something cool. So when you wind up in situations like that, you know, just like push until you get something out there, because those situations don't necessarily come about that often.
Yeah, and at the end, I have to say, like, all the people who participated made the project so special. Like,
great. So I think if you want to learn more about MoMAR, momar.gallery is the place to go. Is that correct? And if you want to learn more about CETI, watch me push this button. CETI.institute, you can learn more. So I will close this stream by kicking each of you out unceremoniously. And yeah, stay tuned, because we have another stream coming up very shortly. Or actually, don't stay tuned here. Go to the proper link. Thank you. And thank all of you,
everybody.
and goodbye.